So today, I'm going to talk about introverts as leaders. It's a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I'm an introvert. Before becoming an executive coach, as Maggie said, I had over 25 years of leadership experience with titles such as Chief Information Officer and Procurement Director. And yes, there were some challenges that I had to overcome to get there. I think what I'm going to do is turn the camera off so that everybody can focus on the slides while I talk. So many people think that one has to be an extrovert to lead. Some very famous leaders have been introverts. Mahatma Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, and more recently, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. So what do we introverts bring to the table? Well, we're not afraid of solitude and reflection. In fact, many of us are serious thinkers, and we will analyze situations and problems very deeply and in great detail. We are also wizards at preparation. We are great at anticipating what we need to have at our fingertips when we have an important meeting and pulling it all together in advance. I know in my case, because I don't feel like I'm glib and quick on my feet, I make sure that I anticipate everything that might possibly come up, every question that I might possibly have to answer. So I guess, yes, it's made me a wizard at preparation. We are also great listeners. We listen very carefully to what people are saying. And because we listen, we know how to listen, we know how to give people space. We are capable of creating an environment where our teams feel comfortable bringing their ideas to the table and speaking up when they think that something is wrong. Another attribute of introverts tends to be calm. We don't overreact to things. In a crisis, a cool head is very important. Leaders who can go from that panicked, oh shit, to okay really quickly are more likely to be able to respond to a crisis in a reasoned manner and to do so quickly. The final thing about introverts that I'd like to highlight is that we tend not to speak before we've thought things through. We've all heard of foot and mouth syndrome. Introverts tend to be less susceptible to this because we typically think before we open our mouths. Putting it all together, leaders who are able to listen deeply and analyze problems intelligently are often able to craft creative solutions. A recent Harvard Business Review article studied introverted leaders and found them to be more effective than extroverts in handling teams of proactive employees. So if you're interested in leadership, there are some questions that you may want to ask yourself. The first one is, do you enjoy responsibility? As a leader, you get to set direction, yes, but you are responsible for your team, what they do and what they don't do. Responsibility may mean that you need to own up to something that someone on your team did that you didn't know about or you didn't authorize. You're still responsible because you are responsible for the boxes and the white space, which is to say the relationships that are on the organization chart below you. The second question is perhaps the toughest one. Are you willing to make the sacrifice? Being responsible for others is more than a title and the extra hours. It's stepping into the spotlight. You are in the spotlight for your team, which means that they are watching you when you're at work. and they're watching you intently for cues about things you like, things you don't like, when you're in a good mood, when you're in a bad mood. I remember once I worked for an executive who, when he didn't like the way things were going, he'd take off his school ring and twirl it on the table. And we all knew when the ring started to turn on the table that it was time to either change the subject or end the meeting quickly because he wasn't happy. So I think the biggest, this whole thing about sacrifice and being on display is perhaps one of the hardest things for an introvert in terms of making the transition to leadership. The people who work for you may be better at reading certain aspects of your behavior than you are. So it's a big one. And the last question you need to ask yourself is whether you can step back and empower others. When people work for you, they won't do things the way you would do them, especially with professional staff. You need to empower them to do their best. And you won't do that if you're hovering over them and looking at every little detail of things of their work. So this is an important question as well. If you have answered yes to all of these questions, and then you're interested in leadership. But even if you answered no, I think the rest of this presentation is relevant to you, because I think even if you aren't in leadership, following some of the suggestions that I offer in this presentation will make you a much more effective individual contributor. So let's talk about some of the challenges that introverted leaders face. Put simply, the challenge of leadership, the challenge for anybody in leadership, is getting people to follow us. After all, being able to come up with the most creative and best solution doesn't matter if no one will listen to you and no one will follow you. So the challenges that we face are being seen and heard. Since we as introverts don't need the spotlight ourselves, we may not have focused on the skills such as public speaking and presenting ourselves as leaders in terms of our posture, body language, and dress. Which kind of takes us to the next bullet, confidence. Since we haven't focused on these things, we're not sure that we can do them. I once had a client who didn't think that she could speak with authority. But when she had talked about a subject that she was absolutely passionate about, I noticed that she spoke much more loudly and with great animation. So I knew she could do it. And what we worked on together was helping her to take that energy and that passion, or those behaviors from when she felt energy and passion, and apply those skills to circumstances when she wasn't feeling as much energy and passion, so that she could project that authority all the time. Another important thing to do as an introvert, or a challenge for introverts, is remembering to reach people where they are. Many people who have great ideas encounter this problem. I mean, think about it. You've spent a long time considering a problem. You've thought about the many different facets of it. You've listened to a lot of people, and you reach a solution. When you want to convince someone else, you need to remember that they haven't thought about it for as long as you have. And the things that are important to you may not be as important to them. So remembering to break it down and think about where they are and what's important to them as you try to construct an argument to influence them is key. And just sort of a corollary to this, I probably should have put a bullet together for it, is thinking about how others see us. Sometimes we introverts are so focused on our interior worlds that we don't worry enough about how we're being perceived by others. Um, because, as I said, you're sort of in the spotlight every minute you're at work. So, how can you get started? Well, you can start by working on your presentation skills, getting comfort speaking in front of people and developing the voice and the poise to do so. Many people have gone to Toastmasters. Toastmasters, I believe, is a nationwide organization. I do know that there are many, many chapters of Toastmasters in the New York metropolitan area, and it's a group that gives members opportunities to speak in front, to make presentations and speak in front of others. They give you feedback, and I've known people who've done it and found it to be quite effective. I took a class when I was in graduate school on public speaking, and so people do that. There are also seminars. Others opt for private instruction or perhaps coaching to up their presentation skills. Another challenge for introverts is presenting themselves as a powerful person. And there are several ways one does this. There's clothing. And one piece of advice that I received early in my career from a mentor was that one should dress for the job one wants, not the job one is in. So look at somebody who's in a job that you want. Look at how they present themselves in terms of their clothing. Also, look at their posture and their voice. Posture and voice are things that one can work on privately, individually, or with help. I know that for me, my formative experience was when I was 13 years old. I was in the Civil Air Patrol, and I had to stand up ramrod straight, and I had to answer my officers in a voice that sounded like I meant it. And they yelled at me and coached me and whatever else they did, and I learned how to project my voice. So those are some options. The other thing you can do in terms of getting started in looking like a leader is to take advantage of your preparation skills before every meeting. Even if you're not running the meeting, you want to make sure that you have something to say at every meeting you attend. And one way to get to sort of get into this is you can talk to if you're invited to a meeting, you can talk to the organizer of the meeting about what he or she plans to do in the meeting and what they're planning to present, which will allow you to give you time to think about what your position is and what questions you might have so that you can speak up at the meeting. And one thing that I find for myself is that sometimes if I don't speak up early at meetings, people say everything that I was thinking. So speak up early at meetings. It gets that monkey off your back. I know one boss that I had at one point said that I needed to speak up at every meeting I went to. And I found that by speaking early, I could get that monkey off my back, and then I could sit back and really listen to everybody else at the meeting. And it was a much better experience. I was much better able to take in what was going on. And finally, another piece of advice that I got early in my career was that when speaking and writing, channel Peter Rabbit. And when I say channel Peter Rabbit, I mean keep the story simple. My boss told me that I knew a lot of detail and that when I was speaking and writing, I wanted to show everybody how much I knew. And that's not the object. The object is to convince people, um, to influence people. And not everybody is influenced by detail. Sometimes keeping the message simpler is the way to go. I won't say sometimes, often it really is the way to go. Knowing that detail is great. When people ask you a question, you're there, you're ready, you're well prepared, you know a lot of detail, you can provide the answer. But in your initial presentation, keep it simple. And now, I would just like to end by saying there's an Aesop fable that compares the effects of a blusterer to a quieter approach. The sun and the wind enter into a competition to see who is the strongest. They decide to see who can make a passing traveler remove his cloak. The harder the wind blew, the tighter the man held onto his cloak in an attempt to keep warm. However, when the sun shone, the traveler got hot and simply removed his cloak. The moral of the story, of course, is that sometimes a lighter touch is more effective than forceful bluster. The same applies to leaders. If you're an extroverted hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Leaders who can think deeply and act intelligently, however, can find the unique and often less abrasive way to get the outcomes they desire. Any questions?
Thanks, Kris. I'll just remind everyone now, if you have a question, you can use the chat box or you can email info@savvyladies.org. And we did have a question come in for you during the presentation, and it's, what if you don't have proactive employees? How can you still be an effective leader?
You can still be an effective leader, but it means that you need to flex more, which is to say, you need to act a little bit more like an extrovert and marshal the troops and get them excited and lead that charge up the hill. And as I said, it means that you need to flex and perhaps act outside of your comfort zone a little bit more than you would have to if you had more proactive employees.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have is, I always feel like I'm not seen or heard because I tend to be more reserved. What are some ways I can make sure I get noticed in a good way?
Well, I think in terms of, and I imagine the question is in reference to meetings. One thing that you can do, I mentioned talking to the meeting organizer. If you're close to a meeting organizer, one thing that you can do, sometimes when people are presenting things at meetings and they have an agenda for the meeting, they want it to go a certain way. Often they welcome help. So sometimes they welcome people coming to them and saying, well, is there any way that I can support you in this meeting? And that you might be able to work with a person on a script, and that would help you to talk in a way that feels a little bit more supported. And hopefully that would help you to overcome some of your reservations.
All right, thank you. Okay, another question we have is, I can never bring myself to speak up at meetings, and I would definitely never be the first one to speak. I know you talked a little bit about this, but what are some things that I can do to really start making that change?
Well, I think you need to ask yourself, what is it? I mean, if speaking to the meeting organizer and working out a way of sort of choreographing a supporting role for yourself isn't something that works for you, I think that thinking about what's holding you back might be the key, and perhaps thinking about what would have to change for you to feel that you have permission to speak up in meetings, and look at those things that you think might be holding you back. Um, it might be a relationship with your boss. It could be, I don't know, it could be any number of things. But looking at those things, really analyzing those things that make you feel that you don't have permission to speak in a meeting. I think that really is important.
Okay. And we have another question for you, and it's, what advice would you give to an introvert who is too focused on perception? How can I get over this?
Who is too focused on how people perceive them? Is that what you mean?
I believe so. It says too focused on perception. Yes, just to clarify that, that's the question. Yep.
Too focused on what other people think.
Yes.
I think the important thing to do is to think about your mission. Um, at work, we have a mission. Um, every organization has a mission. They might be helping people to heal, or they might be lighting up the city of New York, or connecting people, or whatever it is that companies do. But everybody's job has a mission. And perhaps connecting to that mission, and thinking about that mission and yourself as somebody who is working toward that mission, and you're trying to move that ball up the hill. If you can think about yourself in the context of your team and a little bit less about yourself, um, that might help. But I think that really is it's a tough question. It's a tough question because everybody's different who's in that situation. So I'm not sure that I can, without speaking to you and having a conversation with you, I'm struggling with really being able to answer that beyond thinking about the mission and trying to connect to that mission and having that mission be greater than yourself.
Okay. And we just had another question come in, which is, are there particular jobs, companies, or industries that introverts thrive in?
I think tech industries, I think a lot of people um, who are in tech are introverts, people who love to code, people who engineering, people who do that type of work do tend to be introverts. I know that technical people do tend to be introverts.
Okay. All right. Well, those are the questions we have for now. And Kris has shared her contact information here and website, which we'll be emailing out to everyone. So I want to thank you, Kris, for an excellent presentation. And thanks to everyone who joined us today and asked some questions. We hope you'll be joining us again. It was really great. Thank you so much, Kris.
Great. Thank you. Have a
Bye-bye.
good afternoon.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Thanks.